Hello, everyone, and welcome to another First Draft Friday brought to you by Authors A.I. I am your host, Alessandra Torre, and today I'm joined by Lynne Golodner, who is going to be talking about the differences between creative nonfiction and fiction, and how you can make that transition or straddle both of those worlds and the creative processes that go along with that. So welcome, Lynne. It's fantastic to have you here, and huge congrats because this is release week of your debut. You've released lots of books, but this is your first novel.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So huge congrats on that front. And do you just want to introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm a Detroit-based writer, always been a writer. I've had a journalistic career and a career in marketing. I'm an entrepreneur. And I have been writing for all of my life, really. My first book came out as I graduated from my MFA program when I was 25. It was a collection of poems. And then since then, I have had two collections of poetry, 6 nonfiction books, and then this week, my first novel published. But I've written thousands of articles and a lot of creative nonfiction essays for journals, magazines, newspapers all over the world. So writing is my first love.
And with those articles and things like that, what was typically like the length of an article?
Well, when it was a journalistic endeavor, it could be 500 words, it could be 1,000 words, 2,000 words, whatever. But when it's creative nonfiction essays, I usually write between, I'd say, 1,000 and 3,000 words.
Yeah. So that's meaty, but not the length of your novel. So, and your first novel is about what?
I think it was 82,000 words. Yeah.
And what's the topic?
So it's called Woman of Valor, and it is a story about a young woman who lives in Chicago. She chooses to become Orthodox in Judaism. Everything's great. She's married to the love of her life, has 3 kids, life is grand. And then her son is abused at his school, and she and her husband respond differently to this. They're both outraged, but they want to take different actions. And at that same time, her ex-boyfriend pops back into her life on Facebook and says he made a huge mistake breaking up with her, and I won't release any more because that'll give some spoilers. But what will she do? And how does it play out?
So what genre is this? Is it women's fiction or something else?
Women's fiction. It's got a literary bent to it. Even though it's about an Orthodox Jewish woman and it's in that Orthodox community, I've had non-Jewish readers say that they love it and they've learned a lot. So I think it has a broad appeal.
I love that. So if you've spent years, decades potentially writing, you wrote, now, to be honest, I don't know a lot about creative nonfiction. So when is nonfiction top level genre, and then creative nonfiction is memoirs? What is creative nonfiction?
Yeah, so we have all these different genres, and you can define them however you see fit. But the way I look at creative nonfiction is that you are writing truthful stories, but using the techniques of fiction to be creative. And so that's evoking the senses, writing, high details, really descriptive, sort of immersing the reader in the scene and the characters, but it's all based on real events. And of course, even when you're writing a memoir, you're not going to remember every single word spoken or every single moment. So it's to the best of your memory. Same thing in creative nonfiction. You're doing your best to tell a true story, but you're doing it creatively instead of straight reporting, which I would say is the difference between journalism and creative nonfiction.
Yeah, I love that. So, because we do get some nonfiction, and like our company is based on an artificial intelligence that is like a developmental editor, and so a lot of but it's fiction. It's trained on fiction, and fiction is what it knows. And so a lot of people say, "Oh, well, I have nonfiction." And so oftentimes we say, "Well, it depends on kind of the style in which your story is told, because if your story is told similar to a fictional read, in that storytelling style, then yeah, like let's see how Marlowe does." So that's interesting. And your prior books, now I know you said you started with a collection of poems, but were your other books stories that were all truth-based?
Yes.
Or were they different things?
Oh, no, they were all nonfiction. They were all based on real things. Most of them were reported, and so it was more straight nonfiction. Of course, I tried to bring a creative element to it, but it wasn't like a collection of essays might be, where it would be more creative in that way. My last book before Woman of Valor was called The Flavors of Faith, Holy Breads. And it's about how every faith, every community has a bread. And so this is something that we have in common. So why are we at odds if we have different beliefs or different belongings and their recipes and that kind of thing? So I interviewed people, I experienced different communities, and I wrote those stories, but it was really based heavily on gathering information and reporting other people's stories. So I think it was more journalistic. I hope it's creative, but I think it had more of a journalistic approach.
That makes sense. And so when you did decide to say, okay, I'm going to create a story from scratch, I'm going to invent a world.
Mhm.
First of all, did you have any pushback from real life? Because you spent so long writing true things
Yeah.
that now you're moving into fiction. Was there some was there some explaining that you had to do, or was there, there's a transition for both you as a writer, but there's also your audience, and I'm
Yeah.
curious if that even was an issue, or if
Yeah, I
you.
love this question. I think I'm so glad you asked it. But so I spent 10 years as an Orthodox Jew. I'm not Orthodox anymore, and that was a deliberate choice. But I wrote about an Orthodox character, so I know that world. But I also did a ton of research to know it better. And I don't live in Chicago, so I really needed to research and everything. So I cannot tell you how many people have said, "Well, is this an autobiographical novel?" Which I don't think is a thing, but I'm like, "No, it's fiction. It is
Yeah.
totally created. It is not me." And so, but people who know me, they're like, "Oh, I see the young Lynn in this character." I'm like, "No, like that is not me at all." And in fact, my kids have said that my ex-husband, who is Orthodox, has asked them, "Is this book about me?" Like people in his community are asking, "Did your ex-wife write a novel about you?" And I'm like, "No, this is fiction. This is not you. This is completely made up." I don't know if he believes it or not, but that's the truth. It is not him. It's not anybody, any likenesses are coincidental, I will
Yeah.
say.
I love that. And I can see how that would be. I think it's hard for any debut author. Like my first book was super steamy, and I know it was like I had to do a disclaimer with everyone I met. Like I am not like these characters. Like what they're doing is not, my life, but then as you write more and more books and people are like, oh, this one's about a killer. Obviously, Alessandra isn't a killer in her spare time. So the more you write, the more, but you almost did the opposite. You almost reinforced that everything you write is true, and then wrote it. So I could see
That
that
confused you?
being a bit of an issue.
Well, my next book, which is in revisions right now, my next novel is also about some of the characters are Jewish. That's part of my author brand. Is I want to write creative, I want to write compelling Jewish characters, but the story is not Orthodox, and it takes place both in Michigan and in Scotland, and it's totally made up. And so, if anybody comes to me and says, "Oh, I see you in this," I'm going to be like, "Where?" Because
Yeah,
like it's totally different. So anyway, yeah.
and I have to say, a lot of my characters have some of my traits. It's easiest for me to write about characters that are similar personality-wise to
Sure.
me, which is bad because everyone goes, "Oh, your characters are so unlikable." So I don't know what that says about me as a person.
Oh,
Um,
I'm so
but
sorry. Oh, that's terrible.
but my new goal is write likable characters, and then I can't help myself. I like moving to the problem areas of people.
Yeah.
But let's talk about a little bit like the creative arc or the creative things that are similar
Mhm.
in creative nonfiction. I would think for me the hardest with creative nonfiction is adding. I would want to add the juicier fake stuff, especially in a moment where things might be getting a little dry and boring.
Mhm.
So how do you uh, just talk about the differences and similarities between the two?
Between creative nonfiction and fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, I feel like when you are a writer, you bring the same creativity, the same attention to detail, the same observational skills to both genres. I find that with both, I'm doing research, even if it's creative nonfiction. So it's something that I experienced, or that happened to me, or a memory, or whatever, something I'm curious about. But I always end up doing research. Like I wrote this essay, one of my favorites. called The Roads We Travel, and it's about a relationship I had in my 20s, and we were in different states, and we were driving across America together and all this stuff, and it was like sort of a metaphor for like finding yourself and the journey of your identity. But it was all based on experiences I had, and yet I ended up doing research on what American roads are made of, and that was sort of the ending to the piece, and it like was this big culmination. So while it was like a nugget of an experience that inspired the essay, I really had to bring my writing skills and my research to it, you know. And the same thing goes for fiction. So I'm writing about real places. I'm not making up worlds. I'm not writing fantasy or sci-fi. So if I'm writing about Chicago and I don't live there, I have to research it. I have to have street names. I have to have stores that, you know, exist there or did at the period of time that I'm writing about. You know, if I'm writing about the Orthodox Jewish community, and this was, even though I lived in an Orthodox community for a while, it wasn't that one. And this character is way more religious than I was. So I have to research what she would wear and how she would look at things and, you know, different things like that. I mean, I've been Jewish my whole life, and I had to research some of the prayers that she would say, that and the translation. So like I think that I think you have to bring your writer skills to every genre the same way. I mean, even in poetry, I brought journalistic skills to my poems because it's all the detail, it's the reporting, it's like the getting really, really specific. And yet I needed to make it artistic and beautiful for the genre. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that your skills and your approach to storytelling are the same no matter what genre you're in. And you have to have these qualities across the board because that's what makes great writing.
And having that research background, I would think would be enormously helpful. For so many authors, the research is what kills them. Not the act of doing research, it's the distraction of the research. You know, it's writing a scene and being like, oh, I don't know what Chicago was like in the 1950s, you know, or like, I don't even know if that food or that product was invented then. And then they stop and they go and research it. And then before you know it, you know, they're looking at cat videos on YouTube, you know, and nothing's been written for 4 hours.
Yes.
So any tips on juggling how much research is too much research, or if there's, you know, a way to avoid kind of the black hole or the just unending research, writing never gets done?
Yeah, I mean, I am a big fan of setting boundaries. And so, and I teach this in all my classes too, that, you know, it can be a rabbit hole. And so you just need to set a time and stick to it. And I'm very impatient. So I want to get the book done. I want to make a better chapter. I want to like get through it. So I won't let myself spend hours researching. I'll say, I'm going to do 30 minutes now or an hour. And that's all I'm letting myself do. And I'll take notes. I'll, you know, put them in a document so I have them for later because I want to get back to the writing. Writing is what I really love. But research and revision for sure are a huge part of writing. So you've got to do that. You know, for my next book, since it takes place in Scotland and it's 2014 to 2016 is when it takes place, I like they're at a pub and they're drinking a beer and I'm like, well, what beer was like new that year, you know? And so I had a great time looking it up. And one of my critique partners was looking at a chapter and she's like, what a cool name for a beer. I'm like, I didn't make it up. It was like a thing. It won beer of the year in 2014 or something like that. Same thing with names. Like I'm sort of obsessed with coming up with deliberate names for the characters, which I don't think I did as much in Women of Valor, but I definitely am doing for the next book. And so I wanted to look at like what do these names mean? Like Scottish names, Jewish names, you know, American names at the time, and really be very specific. And so maybe the readers will never pick up on it, but I think it's pretty cool that I've chosen this name for this reason, and that's part of the research too. So it can be really fun, and then elevate your writing and make it more fun to do too.
So I'm curious why your first book, you just didn't set it in Detroit. I don't know if there's something specifically about that community in Chicago, but it does seem like it would be easier. And maybe it was because you did want to distance yourself from the story a little bit in terms of you and the characters. But the same question I have also for book 2. I mean, unless I've never been to Scotland, so I don't know. But to me, the research would, I don't know. I think I'd have to visit there. I don't know if I could do that. It's a big chunk.
Yes. So yes, for Woman of Valor, I didn't want it based in Michigan because it's a little too close to home, but she's originally from Michigan, just not my suburbs where I'm from. And so that was like a touch point, but a lot of Michigan young adults moved to Chicago because it's the nearest big city. And so, so to me, that was a natural progression. And I liked the idea of placing her in a city and, just sort of making it a little different. I liked that she's a runner. I'm not a runner, but she runs along the shore of Lake Michigan, which I thought was a really great, landscape setting that I wanted to evoke. As far as Scotland, so I have this obsession with Scotland and I don't know what it is. And I actually did Ancestry DNA to see if there's like any smidge of Scottish ancestry in me or like a former life or something. And it came back that I'm 98% Jewish, which is hilarious. But there was 1% that was Scandinavia and they included England in that. So I'm going to say Viking blood in some way, that maybe was in Scotland. But my kids were just like, why did you even pay for this? You knew what the outcome would be. So, but I just really love it. And I thought, so I did last summer, like 2022, I did a month-long writing sabbatical in the Scottish Highlands.
Wow.
And so I went for a month. I rented a house. It was amazing, one of the best months of my life. And I thought, well, what am I writing if I'm here on a writing sabbatical? And so I started searching for Jews in Scotland, and just because I want to write about something Jewish, some elements in my books. And there aren't many, but I came across some historical figures and was going to do historical fiction and realized as I got into that project, I don't write historical fiction. I like to read it, but I don't write it. So, but I liked these characters and all this research I had done. So I made it contemporary women's fiction and with a historical element to it. And even tried to reach out to the descendants of the people that I found. And they did not want me to write about their ancestors who were widely written about. So, I mean, it's fine. But so I said, okay, no, not a problem. I don't really want to deal with them. So I fictionalized those historical figures that I found and created a contemporary story. They'll probably recognize some similarities to their ancestors, but the names are all different. And so I went back this year because the book is set in places that I didn't visit when I was there in 2022, just so I could get, on the ground details and, really learn a little bit about the area. And so, that's part of the fun of it too, is finding a place that I want to learn about and then spend time there so that I can write about it really well.
And you caught me off guard when you said I don't write historical nonfiction. Because historical fiction, I'm sorry, I don't write historical fiction.
Yeah,
because I would think that would be the you don't write historical fiction.
right.
Okay, so your book that's set in Scotland is well, you said 2014, 16. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is an historical element because one of the main characters is an archivist. And so she's managing archives and she's, sort of learning that career. And she stumbles upon some old journals and letters buried in a cave. And so she has to figure out, who wrote these and what is the story. And there's even sort of like a dream sequence where one of the historical figures comes to her in her dreams and is, talking to her and saying, you've got to write my story and all this stuff. And so there's that, but maybe it's more magical realism, but it's really a contemporary novel with those aspects as part of it.
I'm being totally nosy, but I'm curious why 2014 to 16? Like, why not present day?
I don't know. I know there was a reason. I don't know, but I think I don't know. I did like very complicated math to figure out how old the character was and how old her father is a main character, and then there's a love interest and his mother is a main character, and so I had to
and then like taking the generations back.
Well, no, in the present time, but like where they were led to what's happening today, and so I had to see like, okay, well, if she's 30, and then when did I want her father to be coming of age because that's part of the story, and so he was coming of age in the 80s, and so I was like, I had to figure out like, what is the present time? So not too long ago, but not today.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I needed them to be able to text, so it couldn't be too far
too late. Yeah, too long ago. As a thriller writer, texting and cell phones has made everything much more complicated. I mean, it's much harder for someone to get away with a crime now with DNA and everything else. So a lot of times when we're talking to mystery and thriller authors, a lot of times they do have things that are set in the 90s or, set because, back then when you got stranded on the side of the road with a broke down car, like it was a much more dangerous situation
Yes.
than it is nowadays when you can just sit in your car and call AAA and just wait for an hour and track their progress on your phone.
Right.
But that's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So one thing we were talking about pre-chat was, I guess, like being able to write essays or supportive pieces for your novel
Yeah.
that might fall kind of in the creative nonfiction realm. So can you explore that a little more, what that means? And you have a marketing background. So where I've, perked up was like, oh, there are so many marketing opportunities. If I could have a shorter piece that somehow supported my full-length novel.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. So I've had a marketing company since 2007, and now I really work a lot with authors trying to help them build their brand and then figure out how to market their books. And, if you're a writer and that's what you do, it makes sense that some of your marketing would be through writing. And so writing opinion pieces that relate to your book, like I have a friend who's writing a book about John F. Kennedy Jr.'s death, and so the anniversary is like next year, and that's when it's coming out. So it's perfect timing if she wants to, write an op-ed or something that relates to that anniversary and in some way promotes her book. So op-eds are great ways to do that. And then essays that relate to um, the book that you're writing, the topic, that puts you out there so that people start to know you in this genre or in this subject matter. Then they might go and find your book. Like they liked your essay, so it might become a sale for your book, or somebody in your audience who's going to, follow you. And that's the first way in, is because they read a piece you wrote on Medium or Huffington Post or wherever. And so it's just it's a snippet of your talent and your voice that they can get a taste of and say, oh, I'm really fascinated. Let me learn more. So it's like a gateway to your brand. So yeah, there's all kinds of ways to brainstorm the subject matter, the timeliness, other things that relate to your book, and write essays about them and then market them to publications that will attract your ideal reader audience too.
So that's a world a lot of us don't know about because we're not in the journalistic or blogger space or that sort of thing. So if we don't, like if we just have 1,000 or 2,000 word piece that we've written, is Medium something that anybody can just create an account and post something on, or do you have to be like vetted in some way?
Yeah, so Medium is open to anybody. So I always say it's a great way to be discovered, but I am a big advocate for being paid for your talent. And so if you can sell it somewhere and even make $100 off it, do it. And also because then they're going to want to promote you because they want, the clicks.
Paid for this. Yeah, they wanted to get seen, right?
For sure. So I've never published on Medium, although I've read lots of Medium stories. A lot of people do. And it is a great place to be discovered, but I think it might be even more worth it to start a Substack, to do a newsletter on Substack where you can be monetized and other people can promote you, because then they're going to drive readers to you. So I think that, there's all kinds of channels, and I think that we can look for publications that will, look for that subject matter that might offer to pay. Op-eds are never paid unless it's the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but it is exposure to a huge audience. So the Detroit News, Detroit Free Press are places I've written op-eds for because that's my community, that's my local audience, and I know the journalists there. And if there's something timely or local, then they're going to want a local voice. And so it's just an opportunity to build your platform, build your exposure, and really have more people know you as a writer and want to read you.
So if I had an op-ed piece or something like that, and that's a world I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming there's a learning curve, and can they just hire like a company like you and say, hi, I have this piece. Can you do something with it? Can you see if there's somewhere to put it before I do stick it just on Medium or something else? Is that something that you do?
Yeah, I do a lot of writing coaching, and I've worked with clients where I actually help them write the piece and then I place it for them. But there's also a resource called the Op-Ed Project, which people can Google, and they can find all kinds of resources for writing op-eds and how to submit to different publications around the US. But it's something that publications around the world are looking for on a daily basis. So I have friends who write for The Guardian in the UK. There's all kinds of Canadian outlets. There's every place has some need for local commentary. And so, yes, I'm happy to help people, but they can also start at the op-ed project and see what they find.
And so it made sense, like your friend who had a book about JFK, like that seems no brainer in terms of different things that could be written.
Mhm.
But if someone has just a normal story, like your story or your second story, like what are some examples of supportive content that could be created that is nonfiction?
Yeah, so I mean, I planned my book launch around the Jewish holidays this fall, which was actually really stupid because that's like the busiest time of the year for me because I still observe them. And I'm like, wait, the day after Yom Kippur, I have a virtual launch. And then on Sukkot this Sunday, I have an in person launch, which is great, but it's like a lot of stress. But I could write pieces for like the Jewish news or other Jewish outlets around the holidays or around something that relates to something in the book. For the next book, I can think about writing essays about certain holidays that are observed in Scotland at that time of year because
Mhm.
they're mentioned in the book. Or, I'm trying to think. She's also from Michigan, so there's that angle to it as well. But, Scottish heritage societies or websites or, um, Jewish communities in Scotland. Like there's all different ways to look at the different elements of your book and think about very narrowly focused topics that you could write about and market to those communities who are hungry for that kind of content. And it actually helps you create a niche audience, which is easier to market to than a big, broad audience that's everybody. So I think looking at the themes in your book and pulling them out so that you have different touch points throughout the year. Like my book just launched, but the marketing is like just beginning. Like I marketed the launch for 6 months and now I realize I have to keep marketing as the book is going. And so I'm going to want to find different new angles in 6 months or in a year so that people are discovering the book and reading it. That's just an ongoing thing.
I love that. Is there anything, we're in the final moments of the show. We just have 2 or 3 minutes left. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to cover? And any commonly asked questions that you get from your writers, just anything we need to cover before we sign off?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a great conversation. I think that what I would say is, you know, the best way to write a great story is to just write, is to sit down and write day after day, get your butt in the chair and create a habit of it, but also to take opportunities to connect with the writer community. I have a few that I'm a part of, and I also create community with writers. So I offer a bunch of programs, but I also lead writers retreats. And anywhere you want to go in the world, you can find a writers retreat there. So find a way to do it, to like do the thing. And so, and once you surround yourself with other writers, it just energizes you and it encourages you to keep going. And you realize that this is something you can do. So just doing the thing helps you to do the thing.
And when you went to that one in Scotland, like how did you find that? Did you just
Well,
pull
I just
search for?
it just sort of came up on my social media, to be honest. And I was like, and I looked at it and I actually had a conversation with the writing retreat planner. And I said, well, so when I did the writing sabbatical, that was just me. I just booked a house and like did a vacation. But
Oh,
when
that's what I meant. So the first one, you just were like, I'm going to go on a writing sabbatical. You
yeah,
booked a house, and then you just, while
that's
you were there, you would tour the countryside in the afternoons, right?
yeah. So in the mornings I wrote every day. And then in the afternoons I hiked and I went places, but I also really started to search for writers in the Highlands, and I found a ton of different groups and events, and I would go and meet them, sit and write with them, and I'd made great friends in the writing community there. In May, when I went back to do research for the next book, I actually did a writer's retreat. I was a participant on it. It came up on my social media. I found that it was generative, which means like you're there to generate writing instead of having to critique everybody else's. And that's what I wanted. I just wanted to be around other writers but get my own stuff done.
Yeah.
And then I took extra days to go to the places that factor in the book. So got my geographic research done. But I think just go places and then Google, writers in this place. I mean, this summer I did a month-long sabbatical in Nova Scotia, and I met so many writers, I can't even tell you. It was the best. It was awesome.
I've heard it's kind of like a writer's haven, like a lot of authors go there. Yeah. And it's gorgeous.
Oh,
I have a friend who's there right now, and she's like, you need to buy a house here. Like, this is the perfect house for an author. She doesn't write, but she's like, I could just imagine you sitting here and writing.
I love it. Yeah, it was great. That's like, I'm in that part of life now where I'm just like, where can I go this year? What's my next long trip? So it's really nice.
Love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If they're interested in your books or your courses or your community, where can they find out more?
So lynnegolodner.com is where you can find all the things, and my books are available everywhere books are sold. So, in the US, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Powell's, whatever where you order your books from. But overseas too, I have lots of friends all over the world, and they're finding the books in their local stores. So that's great.
And your new book is called Woman of Valor. Is that right?
Valor, yes.
And if they wanted to read something on the creative nonfiction side, what's like the one book you'd recommend?
Oh, goodness. Well, I would say Mary Carr has a really good book, and I'm trying to think of the name of it. I think it's called
no, one of your books.
Oh, one of my books? Oh my God, sorry. I thought it was like a resource. Yeah, I love to shout out to others. In terms of a book of mine to read, I would say The Flavors of Faith, Holy Breads. It's the most recent one, and it's a great one. But also look for my essays, which you can find on my website, and links to them. And I think in those creative journals, that's a really good way to get your work out there. So it just sort of sparks some ideas for you too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of the audience who was here today. And we'll be back in another 2 weeks with another First Draft Friday. So we'll see you all then. Thanks, Lynne.
Thanks, Alessandra.